this concept of state capitalism is all we have in the world today. And for the people listening on audio, you're wearing a hat right now. It says hashtag end the Fed. I mean, that is the core that prevents the market from actually being free market capitalism, is that we don't let banks.
One of them.
One of them. But I would say if you ripped that out, if you ripped out the monopoly on money, a lot of the other problems would resolve themselves.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, because the government would be much smaller.
Exactly. Government would shrink. Intervention and regulation would recede. And it's this government intervention that's creating these distortions in the market. So they're sending people checks. They have no incentive to go to work, whether it's as a bathroom attendant or some other position. This creates shortages. Governments, and we've seen this history play out time and time again, where then governments try to respond to the economic distortions they are creating with more legislation and regulation. So if there's a shortage for a particular good, they'll insert price controls. This distorts it even further. So are we going down that road right now? Are we just going to repeat what we've seen multiple civilizations go through? Is like, and Mises said it well. It's like, once you start distorting the money, you have one of two outcomes. It's very binary. You either have deflationary crash back to economic reality, or you have the crack up boom, which is hyperinflation. The currency system implodes at some point. Are we going down that path right now? And if so, where are we?
Absolutely. And I think Chris Cole's work would confirm that. And, I'm a huge fan of Chris Cole. He's going to be at the next actual Rebel Capital slide, but most people would know him from his dragon portfolio and his paper called The Allegory of the Hawk and Serpent, which is free on his website, Artemis Capital. I'd strongly suggest it. But he goes back 100 years and he shows that, he has all these kind of symbols for it. But the bottom line is, once you get the debt to the levels that we have today, not only with the consumer balance sheet, but the corporate balance sheet and the sovereign balance sheet, you've got one of two options. You either you have to have a deleveraging. That's the point. Right. And you either have an inflationary deleveraging or you have to have a deflationary deleveraging. And the question is which one do we get? Now, I think the probabilities are highest that we will have an inflationary deleveraging, because I think the system is going to change. So whenever people ask me, say, George, do you think we're going to have inflation or deflation or disinflation or whatever? I always try to say, well, that depends on what the system looks like. Or look at what the system looks like, excuse me. If the system looks like what we have had for decades, where the commercial banking system and the Eurodollar system was responsible for creating the majority of dollars, then personally, I would be in the deflation camp. Now, I don't know that we would see significant consumer price deflation. I think that would still continue to kind of flat or kind of trend up, but I think we would have huge asset price deflation. Then, but if you say, okay, well, the system looks like it is right now, where the commercial banks are lending less, but the government is just this massive deficit machine, that's being monetized by the Fed. In that case, I think we kind of stair step it. You get these, it depends on the government spending. You get these bursts of inflation when the government is spending. And oh, by the way, they're restricting supply to your earlier point, paying people. When's the last time you went to a store, any store, and did not see a help wanted sign? Right. That means we're producing less goods and services, but we're creating more currency units. So what's going to happen? Of course, you're going to get that of labor spike. That's right. You're going to get a shortage of everything. But you're going to get that spike in inflation. But then once the government stops spending, then the dollars stop flowing. Then you start to see the disinflationary pressures, because left to its own devices, I think the economy would deflate. I think we would have a deflationary deleveraging. And you look at M2 money supply, same thing. We're going back to repo in April, and the treasury yields in April. Look at M2. It flattened out as well. Starts to flatten out. So it's just kind of this, we're all dependent, or inflation, disinflation is dependent on this weird government hybrid system. Now, I think the central banks know this to a certain degree. I mean, my goodness, they've had all of Japan to study. You know, they've had the European Union to study. They've had negative interest rates to study. If they don't get it now, I mean, there's absolutely no hope for them. But I do think they realize that they don't control the dollar. And I think that's why you will always see the banks being bailed out. Yeah. That's why I think back in 2008, they came in. I know we had Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and whatnot, but outside of that, they came in and they bailed out every single bank. AIG, you know, the bank, bail out, because they realize that the Fed is not in control of the dollar. It's the banks. And if the banks all go bust, you got big problems. But they realize that that's the system and it's flawed. They don't have control over it. Then they look at this, the schizophrenia that we have with the politicians, and like, wait a minute, we're depending on them to create more dollars. You know, that's not going to get us anywhere. Yeah. So I think that's where we go to a central bank digital currency. And the main thing there that people need to recognize is why that's a big deal is because we all have an account with the Fed, and therefore the Fed can better control the amount of lending going into the real economy, therefore the amount of dollars that are being created. And if you layer UBI on top of that, to where they could control that with an expiration date, to where they can get velocity going, then they would. Now, I'm not saying they could control it perfectly, but they would have a lot more control over the amount of dollars, therefore the amount of inflation. And let's all remember, they have to have the deflation to get the the inflationary deleveraging, which they would far prefer compared to a deflationary deleveraging, assuming it wasn't hyperinflation. I mean, I think if you asked a central banker, you know, would you prefer kind of, let's just say 5-6% negative interest rates for the next 15 years to get that debt to GDP down, compared to, you know, a 1930s, they would go for the negative real rates. Yeah, makes sense. And that's why I think we go to that central bank digital currency, because that's the only way that they can really get it done. But then I think they'll probably do that with the commercial banks. And then I think I like Russell Napier's view on it too, where he says, okay, that's probably going to create certain types of lending for groups that are that have political favor that increases prices. How do they do? Then his hypothesis is that they'll also come in with price controls like they did in the 1970s. Absolutely. And that's kind of the mix that I see as a part of our future. But that, you know, that doesn't mean that the dollar doesn't go to 130 or 140 in the interim. And when I mean, you know, the next year or two, it's very, very difficult to predict these things in the short term because there's so many cross currents. It's just, and there's a lot of things at play here.